You are listening to The Wellness Project. I'm your host, Des, and this is episode number 108. Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today. Today's episode is a very important one because I speak with Tori Williams all about her experience with a toxic job that negatively impacted her mental health. I think this is a really important topic because we spend so much of our times at our jobs and we don't always realize that they do actually impact our mental health. Some days it feels like we're at our jobs all day, every day. And then we sit in traffic. For those of us that still commute, my drive to work is almost an hour each way. It's around 45, 50 minutes, and sometimes it is over an hour depending on the traffic. We spend a lot of time outside of our homes. Tori is going to share her story with us of how she felt stuck at a toxic job, how she finally left, and how she began to improve her mental health. I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode, so help me welcome Tori. Tori, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So, you are going to talk to us about your journey with your mental health because you had a very toxic job. Is that right?
That is right. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, if you would like to get us started with introducing who you are and just telling us your story, that would be great.
Sure. So I'm Tori Williams. I currently am a running coach and a youth running and empowerment coach, kind of for our local area. I guess I'll start with like basically the overall of like mental health, where I'm at now. As a teenager, I think like many teenagers didn't really, well, probably teenagers now have a much better understanding of mental health. But when I was a teenager, not really a thing we talked about. But I did see a therapist then. And I think it was mostly just because I liked having a captive audience to talk to who doesn't, right? I'd been to therapy for relationship issues, lots of times for work stress, work anxiety, work, everything before having a baby, then after having a baby. So I've done lots of therapy is what it sounds like, right? There's different strategies and different things that therapists talk about. So I found different ways to help me in and out of the times that I was going to therapy for work. And I guess I'll get into that more when we talk more specifically about work. But where I am now with mental health, I think because I have now left my job. Wow, that was probably 3 years ago. Sometimes I almost forget that I was there. So I think I'm definitely in a good place. Lots of things that have been helpful is like really understanding mindfulness, being present, and, really understanding like having different feelings actually is important. I think for the longest time, I thought being like a mentally healthy person meant that you were always happy. Things didn't get you upset. Things didn't get you mad. Things didn't get you bummed out. And so that's what I was constantly seeking from, asking for help from a therapist and things like that was just like, oh, I shouldn't be upset by stuff. So it took a long time to realize that like you can feel those things, but it doesn't need to ruminate and, then continue to affect your life in other ways. So I think really understanding that has been awesome.
Was it just one job that was toxic, or were you at a few different ones that were toxic?
I know as I was like thinking about this episode, I was like, oh, I guess I would probably say two, but I think it actually was really just the one that I was at because of being there for so long and all. I mean, I hate to like overuse the word trauma, but I think there was like trauma that I took away from that job that then I kind of started to project those things on the next job that I had because it was a similar type of setting, similar role. And you could see similar types of things happening that I was just like, oh my gosh, this place is just as bad. I went there to help them with their culture change. So I want to say that that wasn't really a toxic place. It just was trying to change and it wasn't in a place that like I felt safe yet. But yeah, so it's just the one place really.
Okay, gotcha. And can you explain what was toxic about that job?
Sure. Yeah. So I had to start taking notes when I was thinking about it because I'm like, I'm going to just either blend it all together or forget because again, I'm like, it's been 3 years. I try to kind of forget about it at this point. So if it gets a little disjointed, that's just because my brain was kind of all over the place when I was thinking about it. Well, first of all, the nature of that job, I worked in residential treatment. So anybody who's worked in that setting, it can be just a challenging setting by nature. It's open 24/7. You're working with human beings. So that is not just your coworkers, but like your actual job is working with people. So that, adds a different element of stress. The pay in those kinds of places are not great. So like just by setup, it was already just a hard place to be. But this place specifically, one of those things, they really did not promote any kind of work-life balance. And that was throughout like all levels of employees. I mean, there's constant vacancies in the staffing. So then they're constantly looking for people to fill up overtime. Even if you're supposed to be off the clock at 3, because of the job, you're not allowed to leave the person you're working with that day unattended. So if your replacement's not there, they can keep you there till 4, they can keep you there till 5. You get a write-up if you have to leave to go pick up your kid from school just because they didn't let you go. They really struggled with allowing you to have a life outside of here. And that was just for direct care staff. And then once you were in management, we had an on-call procedure, but that was like never followed in terms of if I wasn't on call that weekend, my cell phone was still going to be blowing up the entire time with questions, concerns, a crisis, this and that, when there is someone who's supposed to be handling that. So that was one thing that really made just being able to survive kind of hard because you were never able to get a break. With that, they also rewarded people for working more. And obviously, it's not just you're being paid overtime because that's what you should be when you are working more. But those people started to get favoritism in terms of assignments, in terms of shifts they were getting called for. When they were signing up for overtime, they got to pick first. And then just overall, like they didn't value people who tried to have any kind of balance. So if you were someone who clocked in and clocked out for your 40-hour work week, you were seen as like a weaker person or a person who wasn't as devoted or dedicated, or I can't count on you because you don't do extra. And I think that just kind of bred like a toxic way of thinking about your job. It's like, it's not just I'm here, I work my job and I leave. It's like, no, I have to do more because I'm not valued if I don't do anything extra. That was something that was really hard because I was always someone who I wanted to be the best at what I did. I wanted to be valued and I liked going above and beyond. But when that becomes taken advantage of and like they don't set a limit, so then you don't set a limit, it's just, you're like, oh, I'm there all the time. I've now been working 80-hour work weeks forever and I don't know what to do to make it stop because now they're always asking me and I have to be like, no, I want to go home and sleep, right? That was a problem. And then I think I kind of mentioned like the nature of that job is stressful. So there was ongoing stress and there was no way to manage it. Not just like we weren't able to get breaks from the job, but also because the job is chaotic, then for some reason, management always seemed chaotic. And then above management, administration was chaotic. And there was just a feeling of chaos as soon as you walk onto the campus. There was always a crisis that started to involve a bunch of other people. There were always just, we don't know what to do. We don't know where we're going with this. There's this happening. There's this happening. So there was no calm person to look to bring everybody back or like, hey, this isn't going well. Who can we talk to make it go better? And that obviously was like unsettling, in any role that you had. Accountability was another thing. And I think anybody can understand that. Like, we as people like consistency, we like knowing what's going to happen. And so then when people aren't being held accountable, obviously that makes people who are doing the right thing feel bad. But then also you don't now trust the people in charge. You don't trust the policies because, okay, this policy says I can't come to work late 4 times or whatever it is, right? But this person comes to work late 4 times, they don't get in trouble. But if I do, maybe I do get in trouble. So that kind of also just fed into like the chaos-like nature of the role. There were issues of, because we were working with people, abuse allegations that weren't followed up correctly. So that was another thing with accountability, roles not being defined properly, people not being held to the same standards that had the same job. So that all kind of falls into the accountability piece. I mentioned the favoritism that showed up with people working more, but there was also just favoritism because I liked you the best. And people were not shy, I guess, about that, which then also could lead into the gossip culture that we had. So because everyone's there all the time, everyone's talking all the time, you've been there for, almost 20 hours now. So, you have no one else to talk to, you're going to start talking about whoever is here and doing this and that. So there was a constant rumor mill that it wasn't just certain coworkers and certain teams talking, which is not great, but like those kinds of things happen, I think more widespread, but it was, all the way up the chain. People are talking about other people that are things that aren't relevant, which again makes everyone feel a little unsafe also. We did have lots of issues with sexual harassment, which I think part of was a lot of gossip and things people were speculating were happening, or things that people, oh, I heard this guy did this and he didn't get in trouble. Again, those kinds of accountability issues. I personally was involved in, I guess, on the receiving end of a sexual harassment situation, that ultimately I had someone else report for me because it was just such an uncomfortable, like that's how much you don't trust the people that were in charge at that point, because I was like, it's all going to be backlash on me, which it ended up being still backlash on me. But seeing how they actually handle those things firsthand just made you feel not valued and not believed, and not safe coming to work. Also, like the training was inconsistent. So new employees coming in didn't all get the same information. They also were trained by, unfortunately, disgruntled employees a lot of the time too. So they immediately come in and they start hearing how horrible this place is. So they don't, I mean, how are you ever going to have a positive outlook? So it just constantly rebred a culture of negativity and toxicity, kind of, just straight from the gate. And that, I guess, like, I think sums up a lot of the issues that they had.
Well, those are a lot of issues, and yeah, those are those are all things that do create a very toxic work environment. And it's a lot, and it really does weigh a lot on the employees, and just that gossip culture as well. When management, when administration start gossiping, I mean, that's so unhealthy. And like you said, it just makes people, it makes them feel not safe and not secure at work, and that does weigh on you mentally. And we're at our jobs so many hours during the day, especially a job like that where you have to stay until the next staff arrives. And we're at our jobs at least 8 hours a day, every day. So I think people don't really attribute that their jobs could weigh so heavily on their mental health and impact it in such a negative way. So I'm so glad you're here to talk about this, because I think that we need to talk about it more, because jobs can be very toxic for some of these things, any of these things. I mean, even one of these things would have
Yeah.
made a toxic work environment. You had like 20. So
Yeah, I
that
know.
it's really unfortunate, because I know you were in a treatment center. So I would assume that a lot of the people there were, maybe passionate about helping people, or, wanting to help people. And that's a hard job. People go into that if they really want to help people. But when you have something like that and it becomes toxic, I feel like it affects even your inner values, because you're trying to do something that you think is valuable. You're trying to do something that you're passionate about and care about, but then it ends up impacting your mental health. That's really hard.
Oh, yeah. Well, even as like I was, trying to prepare all my thoughts for this episode, because we were going to talk about anxiety and stuff at some point, but like not just like those things that affected me, but now thinking like, yeah, I didn't really always like myself when I was at that job, because even if you don't want to be that person, like you start to get sucked into the way that the things are there. Like you do end up commenting on some gossip, or you also say something negative about the company to a new employee, or you also have favorite staff. You know what I mean? Like you start to get sucked into some of those things, and you're just like, oh, now I'm also a problem and I don't know how to fix me too.
Oh, that's such a good point, because it is a culture. And when we're there all day, every day, we do get sucked into it. And those moods, those behaviors, they're contagious. So that could be really hard as well, where you realize, wait, this isn't really me. Why was I contributing and adding to that gossip? So that's a really great point, too, that maybe you don't like that culture, maybe you resent that culture, but then you realize you are a part of that culture.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like even thinking now, I'm like, there's definitely like specific moments I can think like, I wish I could go back and just like be better, because, it is hard to always be fighting against the current at those places, but like somebody has to, you know.
It's so hard. And when it's even spread, maybe it's spread from the top to the bottom, I don't know, but when admin is involved, management, when that just is the culture, it's so hard to fight against that, It could create even awkward situations where, say, you had a situation where you got a lot of flack for a report that you didn't even make, somebody else made for you. It can become really awkward even if somebody comes to you with gossip, and say you do have that boundary and you say, oh, I'm not going to talk badly about that person. They're my friend, or I like their worth ethic or whatever. That even creates some negativity too in that relationship if those people are toxic and they're coming to you and then you stand up for yourself and that person, that creates an awkward situation as well. So it's very, when you're in that culture, it's so insidious, it's very hard to fight against it.
Yes, no, exactly. And that I think is why like corporate culture change and all those things can be so hard to do.
Oh, absolutely. It's really tough. So sometimes I talk a lot about with my guests building boundaries and things like that, and with burnout and, these toxic work environments. But sometimes the only thing you can do is leave because it's too big of a fight. It's too big for one person. This change, it's just so insidious. It's so deeply embedded in the culture that it's going to take a long time for that to shift. So sometimes just for your mental health, you have to leave.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that was one of the really hard things too for me was leaving. I think it took over a year or so of me like actively trying to leave that job for me to actually to leave that job just because like you mentioned, people who want to work in that field, you want to help people. And I felt as much as like, you felt crappy when you're there and you recognize all the problems the place has, like also you feel valued when you're one of the valued people and being like, oh, well, I'm the one that's doing it right. I'm not ever the person who's being gossiped about, or I'm not ever the one who's getting all these negative things. The first thing I did, I first stepped down from my management role to work. It was overnights, just as a direct care staff again. It was like, I just need a break from all the awake people and drama and all that stuff. And so I did that for maybe 3 or 4 months. And then anybody who's ever worked shift work knows that working overnight can also affect your mental and physical health as well, because that is just not what a lot of us are meant to do. So then I switched to part-time and I just worked on the weekends, but also, not having that clean cutoff made it really hard to not still be involved in that stuff. So then I went back to a different management role full time because again, I got suckered into thinking I was going to be the one that was going to fix everything. And I think I did that for another 6 months or so. And then I found a new job doing quality management, but it was specifically for helping the different organization change their negative culture that they had already, and fix a lot of the problems that I had seen in the place I was currently working. So I was like, oh, this is the perfect job for me. So yeah, it was a long time to leave a place like that.
And how long were you at that toxic job in total?
Um, 7 years, I think.
Oh, wow. And it took around a
Like
year
six.
of actively trying to leave to leave. Yeah, it's hard to leave jobs, even when we know that it's not the right fit for us or impacting us negatively, mentally, physically, emotionally. It's really hard to leave a job.
Yeah, well, I mean, like finding a job is hard, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, deciding like, okay, the unknown I think can be scary to a lot of us too, is like as I'm reading job descriptions, I'm like, this sounds like this place is going to be so much better. There's good, the people are going to be nice, the pay is better, all those things, but it's like you actually don't know until you're there. And as much as you can hate what you're doing, you're like, I know what I'm supposed to do when I'm here, and that just feels safe.
Right. It's secure. You're getting a paycheck. And like you said, the unknown is scary. So you know where you're at. You don't like it. You know it's bad for you, but you know it. It's familiar. You're used to it, especially 7 years. That's a long time. You have your routine. So a big change like that, it's really hard. It's really scary.
So I had recently gotten into a new relationship at that time. And I think that was like a big motivation for me to leave, because I was like, oh, I actually want to maybe start having a life outside of work. And so that was just like a little bit of added, like, okay, now I have to decide, like, do I spend time with this person or do I keep working extra? But then I also was seeing a therapist. I don't remember initially why I decided to, if it was just because I was never sleeping and anxiety and those kinds of things. But we started working on trying to identify like what my identity was outside of work, because it had been 7 years of I do this, I'm good at this, this is who I am. If people ask me, what do you do? This is what I say. And then this is all I talk about. So really trying to find out like who I was and what I value and what I actually bring to the table outside of just I'm good at my job. And that was sadly harder than I think it probably should be too initially.
Oh, right. That's really great, though. I'm really glad to hear that you were working with a therapist on that. Can you share anything else that kind of helped you gain the courage to leave your job?
I mean, honestly, I don't even know if it was courage or if it was just like anger at what I just was so frustrated with what was happening that I was like, I just can't do this anymore. And I realized that I can still make a difference and still impact the lives of, because it was children in the treatment facility, I can still impact the lives of children in a positive way somewhere else. And so it was more just like thinking I need to be the kind of person that I am and hold the values that I have and leave. Being offered another job was helpful too. So I was one of those people who's always kind of looking on, scroll through Indeed or scroll on LinkedIn and see like if anything ever piqued my interest. Because I'm just, one of those people who's always maybe looking for something better. So having that available to me was also helpful, which I know is not always the case for a lot of people. And then yeah, it was really just I think I woke up one day, and I think at the time I was 27 maybe, and I was like, oh, I'm 27. I would like to at some point have a life of other things. I want to get married. Maybe I want to travel. I want to go on a vacation and feel guilt free about leaving this place for more than, 6 hours to go to bed. And so really it was just one day I was like, I need more from my life than just being this person who just works.
Wow, yeah, I can definitely understand that. And so, would you mind sharing how your job negatively impacted your mental health? I know you had mentioned also that you were having behaviors that didn't help your mental health either. Can you share those?
Sure. So, like I had said, even thinking about it now, like because everything was so negative and chaotic and all those things, I was probably not a great version of myself at that job. So, I did talk poorly about some of my coworkers, and I know some of the things, and I don't even know why now it didn't like dawn on me. But there was a lot of like the like toughen up or like tough love kind of, not even tough love, but just tough culture, with like, if you get hurt, like, oh, well, you shouldn't go see a doctor. You're fine. Like you have to stay on shift. You have to help out. And unfortunately at this job, you're getting hurt a lot. And I know I definitely fell into that where if staff, like my staff, are like, oh, I cut my hand. I think I can't come back to work today. Like, I know I would get annoyed at that instead of being like, I'm a compassionate person. You're hurt. You should go see help. Yes, exactly. Don't come back today. Like, go take a break, reset, come back tomorrow feeling fresh. Like, I know I definitely got sucked into like everybody needs to be tougher because we can't lose people kind of thing. So yeah, just like not being the kind of person I wanted to be who cares for the people that work for them. And then anxiety, which I never probably would have described myself as someone with anxiety. I think a lot of the time I was a pretty chill person. But I started not just when I worked overnights, but, sleep was just horrible, was unable to sleep. And not just like couldn't go to sleep, but like I would go to sleep for an hour, wake up thinking I forgot something at work, or wake up because my phone was ringing, or just be like dreaming about work in my sleep to then the point that I'm waking up thinking, oh, I need to fix this or whatever. I know there was times I'd be going, I just worked like 20 hours or whatever. I'd go home to sleep for a couple to come back, and I couldn't fall asleep because in my head, and this doesn't even make sense, but like my pillow was too big. And like I was just so fixated on the fact that like my pillow is just too big. I cannot go to sleep. And like started to feel a little crazy about that. It didn't even make any sense, but just like weird obsessions like that. And then I obviously mentioned a little bit about not having a life outside of work. So I started to notice just more and more withdrawal. I started to pick up shifts at work just so that I didn't have to go see other people because I didn't want to talk to other people. I didn't want to do anything besides work. I didn't have anything else to add to the world besides what I do at work. So I just was like, I can't talk to anybody else. Lots of like heart racing or just like imbalanced responses to like things that you would be nervous by, like you drop a plate and it crashes, like that makes you, oh, you get that little tiny shot of adrenaline or whatever. And then you're like, oh, I just dropped a plate. I was having a really hard time calming down from anything like that. I could feel my heart racing for like 20 minutes after something silly. And then like the hyper vigilance. I remember going to the mall with my mom back when, I don't know if people even still do that, but around here, our mall is not even a mall anymore. So, but I went to the mall with my mom and she's like, why can't you just like look at me when I'm talking to you? Your eyes are darting in every direction. And I just remember being like, oh, well, at work, I have to always be looking to see what's going on. It's like I just couldn't ever relax. And then, of course, like lack of concentration, lots of those unwanted or racing thoughts, constant worry about what's happening at work. How can I change things at work? I'm the only person that can change things at work. And irritability. I know I was often short with everyone that I worked with. And I'm sure I would be outside of work too, but I just wasn't interacting with people outside of work. So I was just irritable with the people that I saw. And now also thinking about it, just like I stopped. I'm a runner, so I still would run as much as I possibly could, but I know that like other ways of taking care of myself, like I don't even remember how often I cooked at home because I was never home. And then I just didn't want to cook when I was home. So, like eating fast food, eating Wawa, eating stuff from work, the cereal that the kids didn't want for breakfast, that kind of stuff. So just like really kind of losing any kind of like civilized person behaviors. I didn't really have those anymore. I just was like, I come to work, I do work, I'm a robot that does that. And I'm kind of rude too. So yeah, those were really how it affected me that I can remember now thinking about it.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And did you start working on your mental health? I know you were seeing a therapist on and off, for a long time, but did you start working on your mental health as it related to your job before you left or after?
It was right about the same time, I believe it. I had started looking for a therapist right before I was leaving. And then it was just like the process of trying to find the right person and all those things. And I don't think I actually met with them until I had left. So I left that job right when COVID started. So that was just like kind of a crazy time too in that process. So I think that was, yeah. So I hadn't gotten to see a therapist until I actually left because it was like, do we do virtual, that kind of thing. But I had seen a therapist for work stress years before that. But I think because in my head, leaving was never an option. We kind of never talked about all of that stuff. It was more, I don't remember what it was about now. But yeah, so it wasn't until after I was leaving. So I'm sure it would have been helpful to have found her before I left. So that's why I think we more focused on, like kind of rebuilding after leaving that kind of place.
Okay, gotcha. And what did you actually do to work on your mental health to improve it?
So a lot of things that we had worked on was because like I mentioned, I found a new job in a similar type of setting. It was really trying to like focus on mindfulness and like being where I am and recognizing, what is happening for actually what it is, not what I remember things to be. We talked a lot about catastrophizing. So in a place that there's often a catastrophe, it doesn't seem as out of place that you're like thinking like, oh, but this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. But then when you're in a place where, 800 things aren't going wrong all the time, it does seem strange to be doing that. And it is, an out of place behavior to start thinking of like all of the issues that are coming up. So really working on trying to not let those kinds of thoughts just go in every direction. So trying to recognize them first, which was hard for me because I was always justifying like, but this could happen. And it's like, but it's not happening. So you need to kind of just let that go. And for me, one of the things that worked and I still do now is like visualizing, and it works for a lot of different things too, but visualizing that thought, whatever it is, and I visualize tying it to a string on a log that's floating down a river. And I know that other people have said they also use this analogy. So I must have either got it from my therapist or heard it somewhere. So I picture those things just kind of floating away and that's enough of my brain to focus on something different, to let that stuff go. So that was a big thing for me. Yeah, I think that was the biggest one for that was work related, on like not going there, but also recognizing, and I guess it all kind of goes back to mindfulness as well, but like recognizing those anxiety symptoms that I was having, like the heart racing, the hypervigilance, inability to sleep was kind of a harder one for me. But is whatever's happening right now something where I need to have my heart rate elevated? Do I need to run away from a tiger right now? Probably not. So I don't actually need to be in this place. So trying to focus on, I like to do grounding exercises too. So one of the most simple ones, and I'm sure a lot of people know this as well, is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 of your senses. So my heart's racing. There's not a tiger. I'm looking at, okay, 5 things I can see. All of those things, I list them. 4 things I can hear or touch. People like to do different, you can go in different orders. Then 3 things I can smell, 2 things I can, whatever one I didn't do yet, hear, or, and then 1 thing you can taste. So really just trying to help you come back to the present, because that really seemed to work for my anxiety that was coming from, those like imbalance and responses to things are not actually being that scary.
Okay, yeah, those are really great tips for people to hear. Thank you for sharing those. So, I know you mentioned at your job there was no work life balance whatsoever. And not only that, it was kind of frowned upon to have a work life balance. So, what tips do you have for somebody to have a better work life balance if they do have either they're at a toxic job or they have a very demanding job?
So a lot of places, especially like demanding roles, I know a big thing that those kinds of employers like to try to do, the good ones and the bad ones, is like make sure you have lots of paid time off, or whatever you call the requesting time off, whether it's sick time or personal time, using those things and really trying to, and I know that it sounds so simple to be like, oh yeah, use your time off, right? And I know that it's not that simple. I started getting to a place where I scheduled my time off out. So even if it wasn't a vacation, it was like, okay, in a month, I probably want a long weekend so I can do something and like actually plan, whether it's to actually go do something fun or like I'm going to plan to be home. So really utilizing that time off. But then, there is an element of like, we need to be okay with if someone's like, oh, you're really taking time off. Do you need to have time off? Because people shouldn't be thinking that way, and trying to just like, yes, I deserve my time off. I'm being paid to be off. My job is allowing me to have this time off because that's, structured into the work that I have. So really doing those things is, I think, really helpful in that kind of place. If it's a place that offers overtime, also having a boundary for how much overtime can I take. Do I need to work this extra shift so I have enough money for whatever it is? Then, trying to figure that stuff out. But if they allow you to work an extra 40 hours a week, you probably shouldn't allow yourself to work an extra 40 hours a week. So having those boundaries of how often can I be there. But also I found for me, so I'm a person who really likes to be busy. And I think a lot of people who end up having not great work-life balance are also those people. So it's easiest to be busy at work because they just keep giving you things to do, is finding hobbies. And I think sometimes we think of hobbies, or at least I used to have like a really hard time if someone said, what are your hobbies? I would be like, I don't have any. So trying to rethink of what those like what's a hobby. So hobbies could be going to the gym, hobbies could be running, hobbies could be going for a walk with your friends, hobbies could be knitting and watching Netflix. So having something to look forward to that you're not at work that you enjoy doing. Again, I know that sounds really easy. I also would try to find things that like had scheduled time. So I joined a gym that had classes, and that worked for a long time, helping me not be at work so much, because like, oh, well, I can't work extra today because I have this class that I really want to do at this time. So it's not like me choosing to be at home by myself or me choosing to go to work. It's me choosing to go do something at a place where people are there. So that's also something that's really helpful for that work-life balance. And I think those are like the simplest tips, even though they're simple, but probably actually really hard for people. But I know you mentioned that you often talk about boundaries. And I think that's something that's sometimes really hard for us to establish, but it really all comes down to that is I need to have time to do stuff to take care of me, but to be that person who can set that boundary, you have to recognize how important it is to take care of yourself or do something at home or do something somewhere, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Boundaries are so important. And the hard thing about boundaries is that they are hard to implement, but I think and a lot of clients have said this as well and people I've worked with that one of the hardest parts of boundaries is people pushing them and not respecting them. So when
Hmm.
you implement boundaries, you often get pushback on those boundaries, and that could be the hardest part about it. And especially if you're in a toxic work environment and you build a boundary, like you said, I have to leave at this time, to pick up my kid, and administration management is pushing against that, that could be really, really hard.
Oh, exactly. And when I know I'm the kind of person who I tend to fall into like a people pleasing type category, and I want everyone to think that I'm the most dedicated and everything. So like I always really struggle with that. But it's like my husband is someone who's very much the opposite. So he, if work says, we really need you to stay. Sorry, I said I was going to go home and have dinner with my family. Like he's going home and having dinner with his family. He doesn't care. And it often never has any repercussions for him because he was allowed to go home. So I think some things that can help with, especially as people who really struggle with like, okay, we set this boundary, like you said, someone's pushing back on it, and now I have to like stand up for my boundary. Is what's worked for me is really knowing your job description, but also knowing the policies of the workplace. So, and as like annoying and daunting as that can be to have to like figure all that stuff out, but it's like you can feel more confident in saying like, no, I cannot do this, especially if you know like this is not what I'm expected to do. So I know I'm doing the right thing. And so you telling me that I'm supposed to be doing this doesn't actually mean I'm supposed to be doing this. And for me, that like gave me more confidence to say no to things because as all of us know now, like it is very hard to say no sometimes and just be like, no, I'm not doing that. So for me, it was helpful to have some kind of backup as no, I'm not doing that. And in more extreme circumstances, I also, and I'm not recommending this necessarily, but I also always felt more comfortable knowing I had other options for employment. And again, that was probably because I worked at a place that felt so unstable all the time. So it was like I had to have a backup plan. But if you're getting to that point where you're like, people aren't respecting my boundaries, I feel like I really need to push back again on them, not feeling like this is the, your job isn't everything. And I say that coming from a place as someone who needed my job to be able to afford everything I had, right? So like yes, your job is everything, but it also isn't everything because there are other places out there. So if a job's continuously not respecting your boundaries, it may be helpful to find another one so that if it continues to happen, you can say, I'm not doing this anymore, which again, not recommending everyone quit their jobs, but just as like an extreme measure if things really aren't working.
Oh, yes. I love all those points that you brought up. Yes, it's so, so important, especially when you have this kind of toxic work environment or you're in a position where they're constantly asking you to do things outside of your scope. Read your policies. Know your job description like the back of your hand. So I love that you brought that up. You could say, that's not within my job description. I won't be doing that. I'm not able to perform that task. So that's really, really important. And we mentioned that it's really scary to look for another job, especially if you've been somewhere for a long time, you have that routine and you're getting a paycheck. That's really scary. But I think a lot of people can feel stuck and get in this mindset that my job is everything. This is all I know. There's no other job out there for me. I'm going to be at this job forever. They can feel really stuck in that position that they know is no longer serving them or not healthy for them. So I think you brought up a good point. Just take a look, go on Indeed, go on all these different sites, just see what's out there. Make a LinkedIn, start making connections. Just be curious and take a look at what's out there because you may find that there is something out there and there's always going to be another job for you. There's always going to be another position. And one of the best times to look for a new job is when you already have a job. So, you're getting that paycheck. You're not in a super tight position or super rushed. You can take your time and find what you think would be a better fit for you.
No, exactly. And I love that you mentioned that because I feel like I hear that advice often of like that is the best time to look for a job. And I don't think we all take that seriously. We just don't want to think about having to do that because it's like I have a job, I'm now comfortable. But it's like, yeah, it's way worse to have to look for a job when you now are worried about paying bills, you don't have a job, and like you're going to take whatever you can get. So you're probably going to have to keep going through this process again and again and again instead of holding out and finding the right thing for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So as for somebody you did work in management, you had these different roles of, changing the work culture, you worked in like the direct service. So you were in different capacities. Do you have any advice or any guidance on things that employers or these different companies can do to create a healthy and supportive work environment for their employees and have a healthy work culture?
Yeah, so I can say from my experience, it is incredibly challenging to change things once they've gone bad, which I'm sure we all could probably guess, right? So I'd say the first thing employers should do is like really trying to stay on top of those things and having their pulse or their finger on the pulse of their organization or their company, because once it gets out of hand, it can be so much harder to rein it back in instead of just like, okay, we're fixing this problem before it turns into a huge problem. But things that we worked on, especially when we were trying to, and I say trying to because I imagine they probably have done more since I have left, but I only really worked on that project for a little over a year with that changing that culture at the one job that I had. But really trying to work towards servant leadership. And I hear more and more organizations gearing towards that or already have done that. So that really does set up a nice structure for everyone feeling valued, everyone seeing the upper management or administration or anything, seeing them as resources instead of just the people who are telling you what to do. So that can really set things up just to feel more at ease. There can be less power struggle, those kinds of things. So that's a great route to go. I would also say training and consistencies, like really trying to make sure whatever you're training for, whatever, whether it's your new staff, whether it's staff moving up within the company, like everything needs to be the same. Trying to have a training department or a specific person that trains too, and having a curriculum can be so helpful. And then having it be ongoing training, right? So that is also just another opportunity for leaders of an organization to get information out, but also you can kind of feel out where everyone's at. And they also feel like, okay, my job is now adding value to me. It's not just I show up, I give them all this information. It's like they're also teaching me stuff too that can benefit, what I do during the day. Making sure that benefits kind of are appropriate for the role. So I think I mentioned talking especially about the kinds of job that I had. So they give extensive paid time off. So making sure that those things make sense for what the job is. Also, the pay and all those things really do reflect the experience, the time and the education you're requiring of staff. And I know that's something that was really hard that we looked at with like what the industry is paying people, but also like what kinds of people we wanted to work. It was really just mismatched. So that just also kind of leads to initial animosity with people coming in saying, I have all this education and experience and you're paying me what? No, thank you. Or this is the only job I can get. So I'm going to be here and be miserable. So really trying to set those things up within limits, obviously, because I know that can be hard too. Also, so we did to try to kind of reverse things when we were rewriting policy, including people from all different departments, but also all different levels. So getting input from, entry level employees, making sure their voices were heard, but not just like, okay, we had like a meeting with them, we heard what their complaints were, what they needed added to this policy, but they never got any kind of follow up or reflection in that. So even if we weren't able to put what they wanted into policies and procedures, they were made aware why, so that everyone still feels included and valued. And I think we learned a lot from those things of like things we weren't seeing that really could make a small change that could make a big change. And then we tried to implement morale boosters, just like different kinds of incentives and things for employees who were catching on to the changes that we were trying to make. I think where we went wrong with that was, again, not listening to the things that the employees actually wanted as like a prize or whatever they were getting. And so that kind of made that not work so well. But if you're listening to what are people actually motivated for, and then give them those things for doing the right thing and kind of stepping on board, because then they are going to champion whatever the culture you want to be, because we are rewarding them for displaying those kinds of behaviors. And then being really transparent. So everybody knew that we were working on trying to change the culture. we didn't necessarily identify all of the negative behaviors that we saw in people and in our structure, but we were very explicit in what kind of behaviors we wanted to see from everybody and what that would look like in different settings. So everybody kind of knew what was expected of them. And then we also were doing fidelity kinds of checks for certain things we would go through. So, like, we made sure the staff were aware of things, we made sure each building was aware of things. So everybody was not just getting the information, but then there was like follow up and feedback in the most positive way possible. But really trying to make it obvious that like we were really committed to making this change so that it actually was going to stick and then be valuable for everyone who worked there.
Okay, great. Those are really great tips. I hope that if there's somebody listening, you're in a position of power at your job, you're an administrator, a manager. I hope that you will take this advice to heart and help create a healthy environment for your employees. That's really great. And my last question for you, Tori, do you have any advice for someone that is feeling stuck in a toxic position?
Leave. No, that's not easy, right? I know it sounds so simple, but yeah, honestly, it would be to leave and really trust your gut on if it feels bad, then yeah, it probably isn't right for you. I know my husband and I get into like a conversation all the time of like, what are things that you need to tough out at work because it's not always going to be perfect. So maybe even if you're feeling stuck, it's hard to get yourself out of that place, but thinking like, okay, what do I want from an employer or my workplace? What am I currently getting? And if those things are so misaligned, or even like, what are my boundaries and how many times are they being pushed? But like making some kind of comparison to like, is this just me having a hard time and not enjoying my work, or is this like really really unhealthy for me? Because I think sometimes we do have to push through a little bit to get to where we want to be or to see the kinds of changes we want to see in a company or anything like that. But yeah, by no means should you be jeopardizing your mental health or anything else just because you think that you're supposed to push through whatever you're working towards. And like you had mentioned, and I think we kind of both talked about, like, always be looking, right? Always be curious. There are jobs everywhere that you can find on all different kinds of platforms now. So just kind of always having your eyes open to having a different opportunity. Also, it would be good to have boundaries at that point to think like, okay, what am I expecting? What am I not expecting? So that once you are finding something new, you're able to find the right something new.
Oh, yes, I love that. Definitely. Tori, this has been so helpful. I think it's such an important topic to talk about. Thank you so much for being here today. And can you share with everyone where they can find you?
Of course. Well, no, thank you so much too. This was really fun. I haven't gotten to talk about work, not that it was like positive or anything, but I haven't gotten to talk about work in a really long time. So this was really fun. But where you can find me, so I have a running, fitness, mental health podcast. It is Raising Runners. So we talk about running, mental health, that kind of stuff. Also, you can find me, well, I don't really have socials because mental health, right? I just can't handle it. So I do have my running coaching. So if you ever want help with running coaching, I do running coaching, but also keeping like a mental health thing as, a baseline too, like not to make yourself crazy with running. So you can find me there as well. And I think I gave you the link for that.
Yes, everyone, I am going to put all the links in the show notes. So definitely go check out Tori. Tori, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much.
If you've ever worked at a toxic job, which unfortunately I think a lot of us have, then I know you can relate to a lot of what Tori was talking about. And those of you who work from home, I want you to know that this can also affect you. Even though you're working at home, you can still be working within a toxic work environment or toxic culture. And I like how Tori brought up the importance of a healthy work life balance, which I feel is so important, especially for those that work from home. I did write a blog on how to manage your mental health when working remotely. I will include that in the show notes, so definitely go and read that if you work from home. But also read it if you don't work from home, because I feel like a lot of those tips can apply to you as well. I know I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I even mentioned it in last week's episode, but I did work at a job that very poorly impacted my mental health. I worked at an elementary school. I wasn't even there a full 5 months, and my mental health plummeted. I was so depressed. I was so anxious. I was late every single day just because I was sitting in the parking lot not wanting to go in. I couldn't bring myself to even go in the building. It was such a toxic environment. I felt like everything I did was wrong, nothing I did was right. I would have ideas that I thought were really great ideas, and they would be shot down in meetings only for me to find out that admin took my ideas and didn't attribute them to me. They were stealing my ideas. One of my coworkers who I loved, she was so nice, she was so sweet. She was one of the only people that was nice to me at that job. I think there were only 3 people that were nice to me at that job. She complimented me and gave me a lot of praise in a meeting, and it was completely shut down by one of the admin, and it was so humiliating. I was only there a few months, and I knew that I wasn't going to return because it was at the end of the contract in June because I was hired on late. And through these months, Mark was strongly encouraging me to quit because he saw how it was negatively impacting me. But I had decided to stick it out because I knew that it was coming to an end. There was a light at the end of the tunnel. My contract was almost up, but it was so hard to even be there for 5 months. So I don't know how Tori was at her job 7 years. I couldn't even last 5 months. If you are in a toxic work environment, know that there are other options for you. You don't have to feel stuck. I know it's very scary, but there is something better out there for you. Like Tori and I said, stay curious, open Indeed, open LinkedIn, just look around. You deserve to be in a job that lights you up, a job that appreciates you, a job that values you, and a job that makes you feel good and like you're doing a good job and that you're contributing to the team. If a job is making you feel badly about yourself, they do not deserve you and they do not deserve your talents. There is a job out there that will value you. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that if you are in a toxic job, this episode inspired you and will help you create some change in your life. If you liked this episode and want something more like this, I encourage you to listen to episode number 93, where I interview Anjum Bandari about how she became physically sick from the stresses of her full-time toxic job. She was going to doctors, trying to get diagnosed. She didn't know that her physical ailments, her physical sickness, was attributed to her mental health and that her mental health was suffering because of her toxic job. So that is episode number 93, how your job can impact your physical and mental health. So again, if you liked this episode, go and check that out. I do not have a guest for you next week, so I will see you next week with a solo episode. I hope you have a great week. I will talk to you then.